Tonight we are so lucky to have literary agent Sarah Fisk, aka YA novelist Sarah Nicolas, aka romance novelist Aria Kane, right? And we're going to chat a little bit, and then we'll stop and take some questions from the audience. So welcome to Ringling.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about your journey from mechanical engineering into the literary world.
Yeah, so I grew up being interested in writing, but I was also very good at math. And so if you know anything about the 90s and being a girl who's good at math, they really pushed that. But I actually started college as a journalism poli-sci dual major, and was bored out of my mind, and so ultimately switched to mechanical engineering. And then I graduated and I worked in the field for a couple of years and I hated it. But moved around a lot. Like I was a tech writer, I was a contracts administrator, and I 10 years ago had been a freelance book publicist and got a job at the library planning author events and writing workshops for the library. So that's like a great fit for me, except for the salary. And but around the same time, or a little bit before I started working for the library, I also started working in publishing. I got really interested in writing in 2007. I was a project engineer and I'd been sent to Central New York as a person who was raised in the tropics in November. And I didn't know anybody and I had nothing to do. And so I started writing again and fell in love with it all over again and started getting involved in the writing community online and everything. And started as a reader at a mid-sized press and read for the publisher there. And then a position opened up and I applied for it and I got it, and it was publicist, and I wasn't planning on doing publicity. I knew nothing about publicity, but worked my way up there and I ended up being publicity director of the teen line there. And then that was a company it was a publishing company, but they had a sort of Silicon Valley mindset. So every 2 years or so, they just restructured everything, and they offered me a job that I didn't want, so I left them. And bounced around a little bit. It was an editorial assistant at different places, was art director very, very briefly at a small press. And I also was an author's assistant working with self-published authors, doing a lot of kind of admin work for them. And so I've been all over the place. And all this time I'm writing as well. And my first book was published in 2015. My first YA novel was published in 2015. And then Keeping a Secret was published in 2017, maybe 18, I'm not sure. And also at the same time was writing romance, because I'd mainly worked for romance publishers. Before I started working for a romance publisher, I had no interest in romance. I, like a lot of people, thought that it was terrible, anti-feminist, all that different stuff that you believe. And I was a publicist, and I got assigned a romance book, and I thought I should read this so I know what I'm talking about, and I loved it. I fell in love, and ever since then I've been a romance fan. And so I also wrote romance, published that with a couple small presses along the way, and then self-published a novelette. And then when I got my rights back for some of those other books, I self-published those. And I was also, from 2012 to 2021, a Pitch Wars mentor. Does anyone here know what Pitch Wars is? You do? Okay. I talked about a little bit this morning. So Pitch Wars was a mentoring organization that you submitted a traditional querying process, and a mentor chose to work with you and did a full edit on your book and got your submission package ready. And then there was a showcase at the end where agents, requested, and it was really fun for the first 5 years. And then really big books started coming out of Pitch Wars, and the stress just, I think, got to people, because they were like, oh, I'm going to be the next Tomi Adeyemi, because Tomi Adeyemi was discovered through Pitch Wars. And then it got really not so fun. But I was on the board. I was managing director. I was agent liaison. I also wrote for Book Riot, which is the largest independent book news website in North America. They train us to say that. And I have a podcast where I talk about, it's called Queries, Qualms, and Quirks, and traditionally published authors come on and share their journeys to publication and also their query letters. So if you are interested in publication, I definitely recommend checking that out because there's a whole wide range of stories. And then in October 2020, I became a literary agent at Tobias Literary. I had thought about it for years and kind of studied and also did some work to get myself financially in the position to do that as well. And because literary agents don't make any money for years. And then, I started in 2020, October 2020. I opened 2 queries in January 2021 and signed my first client in January 2021. And she was my former Pitch Wars mentee from 2016.
Yeah, that's very cool. So these 3 different identities, you give yourself a different name for each of them. What's your thinking behind that?
So like I said, I was a publicist, so I thought a lot about this. And part of the reason was, so Sarah Fisk is my real name. That's my legal name. That's why I work as an agent under that name. But Sarah Fisk is a European lingerie designer, and I write for teens. So I don't want people Googling and finding these pictures, right? That was part of it. The other part of it was my cousin, also named Sarah Fisk, had self-published a really bad fantasy novel, and I didn't want people to think that was me. So I had to choose a name. And Sarah Nicolas became the name. And then when I started writing romance, I didn't want to write with the same name that I was writing for teens under, because I don't want, really the readers aren't the problem, it's the parents that are the problem. I don't want parents finding sexy romance and thinking that's what my YAs are, right? So it's a branding thing. But there are some people who write both YA and romance under the same name. And then Sarah Nicolas, Nicole is just my middle name, that's where that comes from. So it was very easy. Also, if you say it really fast, it sounds like Sarah and Fisk anyway. So it sounds the same. And then Aria Kane, that was just like there was an idea at the time that romance books sold best if they had a very feminine first name and a strong Anglo-Saxon last name. So that was right? That's funny. So that was like the framework that I used, and I just liked the names.
Yeah, cool. So you at first were kind of dismissive of romance, and then you discovered it and you loved it and you started writing it. So what are the possibilities in romance?
Oh, there's so much possibilities in romance. Tyler and I were just talking about this before we were setting up, because a lot of people think romance is so formulaic, how creative could you really be? But putting yourself in such a strict layout, in such a strict recipe, actually forces you to be really creative about the other things too. So to me, it's really fun to figure out, like, you have to hit certain beats in romance. The readers are expecting them. You have to have a happy ending. But everything else is up for grabs, and that's a lot of fun. And I just really love it. And romance is so often really funny, and funnier than I think any other category really is. So I enjoy it. I think it's also good, like, people really hate romance, and I've written several articles for Book Riot about this. So if you want my full, thoughts, you can go read some of those. People really, really hate romance, and it's like, why are you so mad about a genre primarily written by women, primarily written for women, where women get a happy ending every time? That's what you're mad about. Like, calm down.
Yeah. So you were saying that in your podcast, you have interviewed a lot of interesting writers and heard about their journeys, and you said, ask me about that tonight. So,
so Queries, Qualms, and Quirks, it's on its 3rd season, so I've probably done about 90 interviews at this point. And a lot of things have surprised me, which is weird, because I had worked in publishing for 10 years before I started this podcast, and I thought that I knew everything, and I didn't. So there are some stories that really stand out to me. There's more people than I ever thought left literary agents and got a second literary agent, a third literary agent, because people don't talk about it. People are like afraid to talk about it. They think it's embarrassing. It's not embarrassing. So if you ever find yourself in that situation, it's fine. Many people have done it. But some of the stories that stick out to me is, so Mike Chen was on it. Mike Chen is a sci-fi author who writes kind of like upmarket science fiction. And he signed with Eric Smith, his agent, with a book. That book went on submission and died on submission. No one bought it. So like you're supposed to do, like you should do when you're on submission, wrote another book, right? While he was waiting to hear back. And they went on submission and they sold that one. Years later, they were looking for the next book to go out. I can't remember if it was an option book or the next book to go out. And both of them were like, well, what about that first book? Like, let's go back to it. And they revisited it and they kind of, dusted it off and not rewrote it, but like revised it. And then they ended up selling that book. And so a lot of people think if they have to put away a book, if it doesn't sell, then it's dead. And that's not always the case. Sometimes it is the case. And sometimes it really should be the case, if you know what I'm saying. If you've written a book, like my first book, no one is ever going to read that.
Nobody's going to dust it off.
No one will ever see that. But then Suzanne Park has one of the most fascinating stories that I've heard. If you listen to any episode, you should listen to hers. She wrote several books before she got an agent, and then even after she got an agent. So whenever you get an agent, they go on submission with your book, and then if an editor decides to buy it, and if you were here this morning, I think you heard this story, so sorry, you're hearing it twice. But if an editor decides to buy it, they have to take it to the acquisitions board. And the acquisitions board is other editors, the publisher, marketing, publicity. If you're at Scholastic, it's book fairs. Some publishers, it's book clubs. And all of those people have to approve to buy a book. So sometimes an editor will take a book to acquisitions and get shot down, and they can't buy the book. And it's really, really frustrating because you're so close. Like an editor wanted to buy the book, went to bat for you, and you still don't have a publishing deal, right? Suzanne Park did this 5 times with 5 different books. Like, how does she not quit, But luckily, Suzanne Park came from stand-up comedy, which has a even worse rejection rate than writing does. And often to your face, like you get rejected to your face in stand-up comedy. So she was like, no, this is fine, this is easy, So her story is like so fascinating. One thing that I heard that was really good is, I think it was Meg Eden Kyatt, I'm not sure how to say her last name now. She was talking about, it was one of the best analogies I've heard about publishing. Her mother wanted to build a garden. Her mother wanted to put together a garden and planted wisteria. And every year she waited for it to bloom and it didn't bloom. And after 7 years of waiting for it to bloom, she got frustrated and ripped it all out. And then she learned that wisteria takes 8 years to bloom. Yeah. So she was like so close and she tore it all out. And just like apply that to writing. Like I don't have to connect the dots for you. I think you can connect the dots. Because a lot of times in publishing, you're trying for years and years. But you're also getting better every year. Every book you write, you're getting better. Every time you pitch a book, you get better at pitching a book, And so if you're really loving it, like don't stop, right? Because your success might be next year. You might bloom next year. If you're hating it, if it's affecting your mental health, quit. Not many people say that, I'll say that. If it's really affecting your mental health, quit. Because it's not worth it if you suffer from it that much to the point where it's going to affect your life. And then the other thing that I really liked is a query tip that I've never heard anywhere else. And it was Jessica Lewis, and Jessica wrote Bad Witch Burning, which is a really great YA horror. And when she was querying, she has a lot of anxiety, and she sometimes was not just in a good mental place to receive rejection, right? So what she did was she created a whole separate email address that was not her regular email address for querying. She didn't have it on her phone. She had to log in to see it. So whenever she felt like she was in a good place, she would then log in. And I just think, like, I remember I was out at a club one night and got a rejection, and the notification popped up on my phone, and I glanced at it and like ruined my whole night, right? Like, I wish I had had that tip before, because it's just protect your mental health, because this is a really tough industry.
Yeah, yeah. You've seen all the sides of the author-agent relationship, because not only are you an agent, but as a writer, you have an agent. So could you talk a little bit about how that relationship works?
Yeah, so everybody's author-agent relationship is a little bit different. I think each of mine with each of my authors is different from each other. And mine, I don't need a lot of hand-holding. I'm not a very emotional person. I never need a pep talk. I never need, any kind of that. A lot of writers do. And that's not like a judgment. That's just, people are different, right? People need different things. So my advice is always, when you're looking for an agent, when you have an offer, make sure you take that time during the offer call to like really get to know and make sure that they're going to be a good fit for you. Because if you need a lot of pep talks, I am not your agent, right? And I will tell people that on the call, because that's just not, I'm not good at that. I think a lot of neurodivergent people are not good at that, and you understand that. But my agent's great, because she just leaves me alone, and then whenever I'm ready to send her something, she looks at it, and that's exactly what I want out of an agent. So, but I have taken a step back from writing, and when I became an agent, I knew that I would have to take a step back from something, and writing was the thing that I stepped back from. So I still have ideas, but luckily for me, even when I am writing, I let ideas simmer for so long before I put any words to the page. They just like develop in my mind, and they kind of like simmer and ferment. I don't know what they're doing in there, but so I'm still fermenting a lot of ideas, even though I'm not actually writing. So whenever I do have time to write, it's going to come out. It's going to come pouring out.
You're like a personal kombucha.
Yeah, and my agent knows, and she's fine. We're shopping a book right now. But if that book dies on submission, or if that gets bought, that's going to determine the next steps. But yeah, my agent's great. Her name is Rebecca Potos at Reese Literary. If you want to query her, she's wonderful.
You represent romance, YA, middle grade. Why did you pick those particular categories, genres? Well, we know romance a little bit, but.
But those are the genres I like to read the most, and those are the genres that I knew the market the most, which is really important, because even if you personally like a book, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to sell it, because the market does not, to my great dismay, reflect my personal taste all the time, right? So that's why, and that's also why even though I love mystery, I have decided not to take submissions for it, except in very limited circumstances. And it's mainly because I get too many queries, and I can't read that many queries. And if I opened up to the second largest or third largest genre, after I already represent the first two largest genres, my inbox would be unmanageable. So. But that's why I take them under limited circumstances, because I love that genre too, and I know the market well. So, yeah, and I have spoken to a lot of agents who don't necessarily love the genre that they represent, and I think that's really weird, and I don't know how you do it.
Yeah. You were telling us that you get something like at least 300 queries a month. So maybe you could let us know some of the things that turn you off really quickly as you're going through that huge pile.
Yeah, the first thing is not reading the submission guidelines. And I can tell when people haven't read the submission guidelines, because in the form, like literally 2 inches above where you're typing, it says, "Do not address me as Miss Fisk. Address me as Dear Sarah." I probably get 10 queries a week that call me Miss Fisk. Like, you didn't even read it, So not reading the submission guidelines is a big one. That's like the biggest one. That's the biggest pet peeve to me. I have a colleague who will not read anything if it starts with your main character waking up. Like, she's done at that point. It's like her biggest, it's a lot of agents' pet peeve, but I've never seen someone as extreme as her. Looking in a mirror, having a character look in the mirror to describe themselves. It's a rookie move, right? And then for me, I have some like very specific turnoffs. And one of them is like a gender-based magic system that doesn't account for trans or non-binary people. Even if your main character is cis, I don't care. Like, you haven't thought about this, right? I don't want to be part of that world building. Yeah, so mine are like very specific and weird, but I mean, I wish I could tell you some of the things. I promise not to share queries, and then it's like, because when I was coming up as a writer, agents would like tweet quotes from queries, and I just thought it was like a huge invasion of privacy, so I don't. But some of these people need to be on a watch list. Like, I don't know what's happening. I tell my partner sometimes, and one time he's like, they should bring a note from their therapist before they're allowed to query you. Like, some of these things, I don't know.
So what did you do when you were first starting out as a writer? And I gather, did you self-publish first and then do traditional publishing, or vice versa?
I didn't, actually the first thing I ever published was a self-published, but it was a novelette, and I knew the market at the time, I mean now, forever, always, except for maybe 200 years ago, doesn't support novelettes. So I just decided to self-publish it, and as a novelette, like, you know. But my first novel was traditionally published, and that was Dragons Are People Too, which is out of print now. And then, I don't remember the timeline of all the books, but all my YAs have been traditionally published, and then my romances have been both.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about the pros and cons of each avenue to publication?
Yeah, I do a 1-hour workshop on this, actually.
There you go.
And part of it is because, and so this is like the general advice, if you want to self-publish, listen to people who have self-published, but do not listen to traditionally published people about self-publishing, and vice versa. If you want to traditionally publish, listen to traditionally published people about traditional publishing, but not self-publishing. Because I've heard so many just incorrect things, right, from both. And some people have really strong biases in one direction or the other. And that's part of why I developed that workshop, is because I had heard so many talks on like how to choose your publishing avenue or whatever, that the person obviously had an agenda, right? And I don't think that traditional publishing is the right option for every book, for every author, every time. And I don't believe that self-publishing is the right decision for every author, for every book. And there are a lot of factors that go into it. And then I said this earlier today, I say this all the time, self-publishing is a business decision, not a backup plan. You shouldn't self-publish a book just because you couldn't get it traditionally published. You should self-publish a book because you have decided that method is working for you, is going to work for you, and that you're able to put all the work into it, because it is so much work. Self-publishing is more work than traditional publishing. Self-publishing correctly, self-publishing quality is harder than traditional publishing. And you have to go into it with that mindset. So some of the factors is like the market too. You know, some of the factors are outside of your control. So, but sometimes you, like, I would say 10 years ago, if you wrote a YA about vampires, there was 0% chance it was going to get published, right? And so you have to factor that into your decision too. You can also just put it aside. Vampires come back every about 12 years. It's very cyclic. And so right now, YA vampires are coming back, right? So you can also just put a book aside and bring it back whenever the market is ready for it, or you can self-publish it. But just be prepared. Make sure you understand exactly what goes into that, because it is a lot of work.
Yeah. If somebody was sending you a query pitch letter tomorrow, what is the thing you really want to see? What do you think is hot at the moment?
Well, I'm closed Aquarius, so you can send me a query tomorrow. I open back up June 1st. I have personal wish lists, and those are on my website too. You can go to sarahnfisk.com, Sarah with an H, and fisk.com. But I would love to see, I grew up in small towns a lot, and traditional publishing does not understand small towns. And I would love to see a lot of really authentic small town representation. I would especially love to see middle grade small town. I would especially love to see, I'm a scaredy cat, I don't really do horror, but I can handle middle grade horror. Like, that's my level, that's where I'm at. So I would love to see a middle grade horror set in a small town. I've been calling it Monsters in a Cornfield. It doesn't have to be a cornfield, but I grew up in the South and the Midwest, and so love to see more of that written by people who have lived there, because I've seen small towns written by people who have never lived in a small town, and it's not good. Why are there 12 bakeries? There are 500 people who live in this town, you know? So that's one of my wish list items. I really, really want a confidence artist, what are they called? Anyway, a con artist who's not a man. That's like in any genre. I want it. I really want it. A charismatic one, especially. It's right up there on my list. Love. What was that? White collar. Oh, I love white collar. When I was younger, not that younger. Loved white collar. So something that makes me feel like that. Leverage. Love that. What else do I want? I want a lot of stuff. I have a wide range of tastes. So I really want complicated sibling relationships. I keep getting books pitched to me that say they're complicated sibling relationships, but what they mean is like the person has a sibling, and that's not the same thing, right? I want like siblings who are going to kill each other or kill for each other. Like, that's what I really want.
Yeah, cool. You mentioned that you have actually never been to New York City, although it's kind of.
All my secrets.
I know. Well, that's why I was listening. But that isn't a disadvantage, and in fact, as you get interested in hearing about small town America and different parts of America, could you talk a little bit about the traditional publishing industry and kind of where it is now and what the hot issues are in it now?
Yeah, the traditional publishing industry has been very, very slow to change. One of the slowest, I think, industries to change. They just tried to pretend like ebooks weren't a thing for like 5 years. So that's what we're dealing with. And we're also dealing with most of the decisions being made by people who don't care about books. So you have to think about it that way. Like, everything's being made on a spreadsheet. All the decisions are made based on a spreadsheet. So that sucks. And New York City is a very, very expensive city to live in. And it has historically kept a lot of different populations out of publishing. So all the people that are making the decisions about what books get to be published are primarily upper middle class or wealthier white people, straight white people, right? And that has impacted the industry for a very long time. And it's really hard to break that cycle because most of traditional publishing is built on an apprentice model where you have to work for free for months or years before you can really start getting paid. And who can do that, right? We know who can do that, and that's who's been making the decisions in publishing for a long time. So it's starting to change a little bit. I think the pandemic kind of forced them to change a lot because they couldn't be working in the office. And all of a sudden, everyone realized we're just emailing files back and forth. Like, we don't have to be in the office together. And so a lot of publishers have gone to a hybrid model or a work from home model. And agencies especially have gone to that because you especially don't need to be in the office to do work as a literary agent. And in fact, most of the work is not done in the office, even when you are an office person, because when you work in the office, there's no time to read manuscripts, there's no time to edit manuscripts. So even before everybody was working from home, all the editing was being done at home anyway, because editors were taking work home, right? So I have a lot of thoughts about the way traditional
right
publishing is scheduled. I think there are a lot of people doing a lot of really good work and trying to change the industry, but they're not the people with the money and the power. And so it takes kind of a ground up operation to make that happen. So I'm a founder of Disability in Publishing, which is an organization for disabled people who work in publishing. It doesn't support authors. We get asked all the time. That's not the goal of this organization in particular. It's to support disabled employees. And one of our members is a wheelchair user, and she went for an interview, and she couldn't even get to the interview room. So like, how is she supposed to get a job in publishing? She can't even get in the interview room, you know? So it's excluded people for a really long time, and it's starting to change very, very slowly, but it also goes up and down. Like, you see a lot of like people from those less represented backgrounds being hired, but then they're leaving within 1 or 2 years because they're not being supported. And so, yeah, we're trying.
Yeah. Can you pull out maybe one thing that you found kind of heartening, something that has changed even incrementally?
Well, yeah, we're allowed to publish queer books with happy endings now, so that's a positive. In the 70s, if you had a queer person in a book, it had to end tragically to be published. And we have a lot of people who think Radcliffe is one of them. Radcliffe is a pioneer in queer romance, if you've never heard of her. She was a surgeon, and she basically founded her own publishing company so she could publish happy queer romances. And I was at RT when she got awarded with this like Lifetime Achievement Award, and I cried, don't tell anybody. But I forgot what the question was. I just started talking about Radcliffe and I just fangirled.
The thing that is happening, even in an industry that's struggling and only moving slowly.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think there are a lot of people trying to make a change, and it is happening incrementally. But then you have people on the opposite side trying to do this, the exact opposite, and trying to, if you are in sci-fi fandom really much, you know about the sad puppies. If you don't know about the sad puppies, Google it, right? It was just this like massive effort to like make sure a woman never won a science fiction award, essentially. So, it's a battle. It's a battlefield right now.
We're going to open it up soon to the audience to ask questions, but I thought it might be interesting if you could kind of project yourself back to your pre-published days and think about, how you came along. Is there a mistake you made that you were actually kind of proud of? Or even just a mistake that you'd like to walk away from? But sometimes mistakes turn out to be something that you're proud of later.
Maybe not.
No. I mean, everyone has to go, not everyone, I guess, but most people go through this journey based on my podcast. All the people that have told stories on my podcast have very similar, where they didn't realize how hard it would be. They didn't realize how much work it would be. They thought, or even if they knew how much work it was going to be and how hard it would be, they thought they were going to be the exception, right? And some people, very occasionally, are the exception. But it's just a really hard industry, and I think if I had it to do over again, I would focus on developing my craft early on. Whereas early on, I was just focused on writing a book so I could pitch it so I could get published, right? And my craft wasn't quite there. And even still, I'm working on developing my craft. And I ask on my podcast, is there anything you feel like you made that was a mistake along the way? And I would say about half the people say they queried too early. And part of it is publishing is so slow, right? And it just feels like forever to wait, 6 months. But on the flip side of that, publishing is so slow that if you wait 6 months, not much is changing, So don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so folks, raise a hand. Have a question for Sarah? Logan? Do you want to?
So how did you learn to understand the markets you're writing for? I know when you said for YA, a big part of it is like, I know the market, that's really important. Is there like any form of like routine you do to keep up to date, to make sure everything's current?
Yeah, so for the recording, the question was, what did you do to keep up on the market? What do you do to keep up on the market? One is I read, so there's a website called Publishers Marketplace, and they send out a daily email of all the deals that were announced that day. So I do read that, and it's just like 2-sentence descriptions for each book, so it's not a lot to read. I also just go to the bookstore, see what's on the shelves, read it, read the back cover copy. But when you do go to the bookstore, just keep in mind that those books were sold minimum 2 years ago. So that was the market 2 years ago. So what's being sold right now is like a better indication of the market. And also I have regular meetings with editors. I have multiple meetings a week with editors where they're telling me what they're looking for. And everyone is just looking for like a really good book. And they're also looking for something that is both familiar and different. So it's easy, it's fine. Okay.
What was the name of the romance novel that first turned you on, and what about it was hooking you to romance?
Yeah, what was the first romance that turned me on to romance, and what about it did? Man, I forgot the title, but Catherine Bell is the author. And it kept my interest the whole time. Like, we all had done a lot of assigned reading in school, and some of those books are just a slog, And so that's primarily why I'd been reading YA for so long, because YA is designed to be interesting the whole time, right? It's designed to hold your attention. So romance did the same thing for me. And also it was very funny, very funny. And then it was also really empowering. Like the message behind it was really empowering. The character was really, going after what she wanted, the main character. Excuse me. And I don't know, I fell in love with it. And I left the book feeling happy. I've been chasing that feeling ever since.
I'm admittedly not very familiar with the publishing industry or writing in general, but you were talking about your inquiries and submissions, and I just want to double check with you. Do you feel like the relationship between the writer and then the agent is very personal? Like you have to figure out both of y'all click together, you're both seeking the same things, the same audience, the same messages, and because of that, it's going to be a very pick and choosy almost kind of idea. You can't just I guess sell yourself to a big guy and then you're like, yeah, I got it, or it's just very much do we have the same audience, do we have the same ideals and morals or kind of demographics that we're aiming towards?
Yeah, I think it can be very personal. For some agents, it's not. For some agents, it's just a purely business thing. Can I sell this or not? That's a more kind of old school kind of a vibe, though. And the bigger agencies tend to be more like that, too, the ones that have 50 agents or whatever. But it can be very personal, and I think every agent has their own decision about what they want to work with. Me personally, there are definitely people that even if they wrote a great book, I would not work with them for other reasons. If they were particularly bigoted in some way or something, that's going to be a big no for me. So yeah, it can be a really personal, but sometimes it cannot. Me and my agent very rarely talk. I love her and she's great, but we very rarely talk. I send her what I have when it's ready, and she sends me back edits, and that's kind of it. Or what I really need help with. The whole reason that I need an agent is because I have too many ideas, and I need someone to tell me which one to write. And she often tells me, "Oh, both are great." I'm like, "No, stop, go back. Tell me what to write." So I don't have a whole lot of interaction with her, but I know another author that is represented by her, and they talk almost every day. And so it really depends on the person and what they need. So it varies so much. I often joke that like the answer to every publishing question is it depends, but it's true.
Hello. So earlier we were talking about just like how you see the market going in reference to our meeting, and you mentioned like everybody wants weird books now. Like overall anybody wants that. So as somebody who is receiving these query letters and reading these manuscripts, is like at what point is it like this is just I can't even read it? It's weird, you know, not in like it's oh my god it's so bad, but it's just it's jumping out of the manuscript and going into all kinds of territory that doesn't really suit what it needs to be. So in reading those, like, where do you draw the line? Like, it's too weird.
Yeah. So for those that, well, it was just us. So I was going to say for those who weren't there, but it was just us. We were talking specifically about the adult science fiction fantasy market. Like weird is a trend in that market. So we were talking about like Gideon the Ninth, right, as a perfect example of that. Great book. If you haven't read it, read it. But for me, it's like, if I don't know how to pitch it, if I don't know how to tell someone what the story is about, then it's too weird. Like Gideon the Ninth is like easy. It's like, what is it? Sword lesbians in a crumbling space necro palace, basically. You can pitch that, right? It's weird, but you can pitch it. So if you can't pitch it, then it's too weird. I did offer on a book. I didn't get it. The author wanted someone else. But I did offer on a book where I read the query and it was like, what? I don't even understand what this is about. But then I started reading it and the writing was so good. Like I just got chills like thinking about it right now because the writing was so good. And I ended up reading the whole book and I offered. And he went with someone else. It's fine. I understand. I'm a newer agent, so like it happens a lot. And I would make the same decision probably, you know. But so sometimes even if it's a weird, and it was like a weird concept too, the writing can pull it through, you know. So it depends.
Okay, so people know you have a whole bunch of different writing workshops that you give. They're all about an hour long, and it's a bunch of the topics that are, you know, super useful and interesting. You've done a great job of like summarizing a lot of those points in like a minute. So let me ask you to do that again here. Networking is something that these people all need to know more about. You give an hour-long talk, so can you summarize that hour-long talk in like 90 seconds with some of your best tips?
Yeah, be nice, don't be a dick. The thing that I always say is, I always ask people, do you know what the publisher of Simon & Schuster looks like? Do you know what he looks like? Do you know what he looks like? Well, it's a her, but you don't know if they're in this room, right? So like, I don't understand when people treat other people like they're not worth their time because you don't know who that is, right? So treat everyone like they're worth your time. You don't have to like give everyone all of your effort, right? But just be like generally nice to people. And you never know who's gonna be like a good connection for you down the road. So I've had people literally at conferences be so mean to me. And then this particularly was when I was working for Entangled when I was a publicist. And then I would be talking to our publisher, who everyone knew. And then all of a sudden these people were really nice to me. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, you think I don't remember how you were 15 minutes ago? So just be nice to everyone. Networking is extremely important. Almost every job I've gotten in publishing has been because of networking. I think the only job was Book Riot because it was on a writing sample. But my job now as a literary agent, I got through networking. My internship before that, I got through networking. My first ever job, I got through networking. So it can really serve you. Networking can't get you something that it can, but for most people, networking can't get you something that you haven't earned, but it can put you in the position to get something that you have earned, right? When a job listing goes up, right, and 500 people apply, if you know someone, then you're going to get looked at a little bit closer than if they didn't know your name, right? And that's just a fact. That's everywhere. Every industry is like that, right? So networking, people often think of networking as like this like shady, like salesman-y thing, but it's not that. It's just treating people with basic respect, making connections with people, and allowing them to make connections with you. And it can be a really great thing. It can lead you a lot of places. Even if you don't get jobs out of it or whatever, then you still have contacts, you still have a support system out of networking. And I've had, you know, as writers, you need people who critique your work, right? And how do you find those people? Through networking. Even your classmates, even like MFA classmates, if they don't like you, once you graduate, you're never gonna hear from them again, right? So networking is everything. And even, so, I mean, people, so we were talking about this in the car. I went to a certain conference in Florida, and people were just coming up to me and just like, hi, I'm so-and-so, and this is what my book is about. And I was like, we are at a cocktail party. Like, talk to me like a human, please. And then we had this woman come up to us, and she was just like chatting, you know, we were talking about her dress. We were talking about just whatever the appetizers were, and she was like warm and friendly. And when she walked away, I was like, I love her. And I would do anything for her, you know? Like if she emailed me tomorrow and asked me to critique her career, I'd be like, yeah, of course, Nancy, yes, let's do it. So that's gonna get you places faster than just trying to pitch or sell yourself cold.
So you did a lot of things before you really got more serious into writing and publishing and all this other stuff. Is there any lessons that you took from your previous life, basically, that helped you, or things that maybe like even got in your way because you weren't focused on it right off the bat?
Yeah, so one thing that I took from my previous career as a project manager is everything, literally everything, is easier if you have a document organization system. Literally everything. Organize your documents. Create Excel sheets. Put all your information in one place. It will change your life, I promise you. Things that got in my way, I mean, transitioning from tech writing to creative writing is not easy. You have to unbreak a lot of bad habits. Well, they're good habits in tech writing, they're bad habits in fiction writing, right? And so that is really hard. And I when I was a tech writer, I didn't write because I was tired of writing. And so a lot of people think, oh, I'll get a day job as a tech writer and I'll write fiction at night. And it's exhausting because you're just writing 12 hours a day, right? So don't get a job in writing is my advice. I don't know. Did that answer your question? Okay, cool.
So piggybacking off of your answer there, what would you say is some of the most important habits that you've found for creative writing and pushing out your stuff?
Yeah, the biggest one is don't self-reject. Don't tell yourself that you're not good enough to write this story. Don't tell yourself that no one's going to be interested in the story. That's a big one. It's a mindset shift. I know mindset seems like really like woo-woo whatever, but I think mindset is really important to writers. And I always tell people like have the confidence of a mediocre white man, right? Because trust me, I've seen them in my inbox. They have a lot of confidence. So just harness that. I personally, so some people will tell you, you need to have a schedule, you never running schedule, you need to write 1 hour a day or whatever it is. And I don't believe that. I am a marathon writer, I'm a session writer, so I will write 6 hours at a time, and then not write for a week. And that's just the way that my brain works. If I tried to write 1 hour a week or 1 hour a day, I would spend the first 40 minutes just getting situated, right? So take the advice that works for you and leave all the rest on the floor. And people will be very prescriptive in their advice. They'll tell you that you have to do this. If you don't do this, you're not a writer. All of that is crap. don't listen to them. And if someone's telling you that, don't listen to them about anything they say.
You mentioned neurodivergence, and just with that comment, actually, about writing, I was wondering if you had any other advice for neurodivergent writers, because I find that a lot of the common advice does not apply to me at all. So I was wondering if you had anything specific.
Yeah, find your community, number one, because I think, and it's something that how do I say this? I have done a lot of work into looking into communication styles that work well for neurodivergent people. We're kind of like, and I think most agents really, really are bad at communicating, which is weird because that's like their entire job. And I am doing my best to train other agents, but it's really hard. And because also it's even harder because it's such a subjective business. So sometimes you can't explain things in concrete terms, right? Which is like the number one rule. And so find your community, and then you can help each other understand some things. It's much better in a group situation. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. And if an agent or an editor or someone else in a position of power treats you badly because you need something clarified, then you do not want to work with them. And that's the number one rule. Like, do not do business with people who refuse to accommodate anything that you might need accommodated. And that goes for everything in any aspect, right? And I think writers get a little starstruck by agents, and they're afraid of agents, and they're afraid to be too much trouble, or they're afraid to contradict them, and you should not be. And if someone makes you feel like you should be afraid, then just avoid them. Do not work with them. Because even if you follow all their rules, all their unwritten rules, right? Because that's the thing we're talking about. And you get signed by them, it's not going to be a good working relationship. So it's not worth it to sign with someone who refuses to accommodate something.
Hi, I guess on that note, what are some red flags to look for when you're like looking for an agent and hopefully getting offers? And
Yeah, you said this video is not going online, right? Mark Gottlieb at Trident Literary, number one. He's a walking red flag. He's also very, his daddy likes to sue people who talk bad about him, so that's why I checked that we weren't putting this online. It's true, everyone knows it. But so, for example, some of the things that he does is he will sign books that have interest from editors or other agents without having read them. He will send them on submission without editing them. He does a spaghetti model. He like blind CCs a whole bunch of editors without personalizing their letters. These are all things that agents shouldn't do. If they have been kicked out of the American Association of Literary Agents, that's a big red flag, because you have to like work really hard to violate their ethics code. He did it. I really don't like him, I'm sorry. So the American Association of Literary Agents, since I mentioned that, is a professional organization for literary agents. You don't have to be in AALA as an agent. And someone who's not in it is not necessarily a red flag, because they do have some limitations that they place on agents that make it especially hard for agents who are not financially supported by partners to make a living. So it's not necessarily a red flag, but if they've been kicked out, that is a red flag. If someone is very prescriptive so like on the offer call is when you're going to find this out. They're very prescriptive in their communication style. Like they're like, this is how I communicate, and that's it. There's no like, accommodations made or anything, then that's a red flag. If an agent has been an agent for several years and has only sold books to publishers that take unagented submissions, that's a huge red flag. What are some others? If they sign a whole bunch of clients all at once or within a short period of time, it's a huge red flag. I'm trying to think. I feel like I know so many, but I think, I don't know, we'll end it there, yeah.
Hello. This is like an oddly specific question about networking. Incredibly niche, so, but I found that like my specific struggles when reaching out to like recruiters, I've been kind of worried that like, oh, like I don't want to approach them. Like I'm only here to talk to you about like my work, but it's like we're messaging on LinkedIn. Like I haven't met you anywhere else, and like LinkedIn is like a very professional place. Like what else am I able to talk about? Like, do you find that you receive like submissions or like you're approached by people who act like this, but you're like, yeah, I'll give it a pass. Like this might not be the best option. I don't know. I'm going all over the place with this. But my point is like, does it ever feel like awkward to like receive submissions where they only talk about their own stuff, but then it's like you're in a position where like that's the only thing you can talk about with them?
Yeah, so if it's a platform where that is what's happening, if you go to, for example, a pitch session at a conference, the only reason we are having that meeting is for you to pitch your book, right? So just do it and be confident doing it too. I've definitely had pitch sessions where the person is like afraid to tell me about their book, and I'm like, this is literally the whole reason we're here. It's the only reason we're here. If it's a query letter, the whole purpose of that whole apparatus, all the software, the query letter itself, is for you to pitch your book. So don't be shy about that. The only time is if that is not the explicit purpose of the session, then don't pitch yourself and wait. Because inevitably what happens to me, if I am at a writer's conference and someone talks to me for long enough, I'm gonna be like, so what's your book about? Right? That's when you pitch. You don't like walk up to me and hand me your business card and start pitching without introducing yourself or an invitation. So if you have an invitation to pitch in any format, whether it's implied or explicit, then you pitch. But if you don't have an invitation to pitch, don't.
All right, well, thank you so much, Sarah, for being here. Can we have a round of applause for our guests?